It's April 2019, and Stars of Sandstone is ready for action. The stage is set for an event where you can really get close up and personal to the sights, sounds and smells of a bygone era. For 10 days, people from around the world converged here to immerse themselves in clouds of steam, smoke and nostalgia. There's only one place in the world where all this could have taken place. Sandstone Estates is a large commercial farm in the eastern Free State of South Africa. It lies on the border of the Kingdom of Lesotho, with the Maluti Mountains of that country as its ever-present backdrop. This is the home of the Sandstone Heritage Trust, a private organization dedicated to preserving the industrial and agricultural heritage of Southern Africa. The Trust is most famous for its magnificent collection of historic locomotives and rolling stock, machines that ride the rails of an extraordinary narrow-gauge railway system. It was a railway that first put Sandstone on the map. The line was constructed in phases between 1999 and 2005, with many deviations and additions taking place since then. Today, the main line extends for 26 kilometers, and not the least of its attractions is the spectacular scenery through which it passes. The first train ride of the event ushers in the stars of the show and will take visitors on a journey to experience the power and the spectacle of steam. Most activities were concentrated along the railway, giving a ringside view of the passing parade. And no one could appreciate it more than someone directly involved in railway preservation himself.
We come here to Sandstone from the UK to see the Stars of Sandstone. I've known about it for many, many years and what goes on, and I'm involved in what I can in preservation in the UK, and to come here, it's extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary. I've never seen a collection of railway artifacts, of agricultural artifacts, of military artifacts, all in one place. It's extraordinary. The UK gave railways to the world, and they form the background of the development of the industrial society we know today. That's all moved on, and to preserve that record is important as an understanding of where we've come from, so we know where we're going. And the collection that is here, largely British built, some other European manufacturers and indeed some South African, is a wonderful record of the development of that industrial society. The whole collection is special, it's unique, it captures examples of every railway that you can think of, and here they are. I think I counted 24 that were in traffic yesterday and another 30 that are unrestored. It is a record of railways that the like of which you'll never see anywhere else in the world.
Working the line is a fleet that includes everything from the smallest sugarcane locomotives and industrial engines to behemoths of a size and power that could outclass many locomotives on the standard gauge. These articulated garrets, for example, belie the fact that the rails thereon are only 24 inches apart. An illustrious visitor to Stars of Sandstone 2019 was South Africa's Blue Train. This was the first time ever that this famous train ventured onto the 3-foot 6-inch gauge line between Bethlehem and Bloemfontein. 53 passengers had enjoyed a luxurious trip from Pretoria to Sandstone. For 2 days, they would indulge themselves in vintage nostalgia before gliding back to Gauteng. She drew up at Vailima siding alongside the Sandstone Railway, allowing passengers to step from one world into another as they chose. But trains weren't the only way to experience the vintage world of Stars 2019. Although there was plenty to see and do around the main complex at Hoekfontein, there were also many ways you could hitch a ride into history. The idea was simply to hop onto anything that happened to be going past. You could find yourself bouncing along on a peerless 3-ton truck, enjoying the rough ride of a workhorse 110 years old. Or you could take a smoother ride on any number of vintage cars and pickup trucks. This one is a 1953 Series R International. But for the ultimate African road transport experience, there was nothing to beat the service offered by the African Star Bus Company. In such a vehicle, you could easily imagine yourself en route for Lubumbashi or Bujumbura, rather than Vailima, 10 kilometers down the road. Another way, of course, was simply to leave the ground and take to the skies. Vintage helicopters and planes have been a part of heritage events at Sandstone from the outset, and this year was no exception. With aircraft coming and going all the time, the Sandstone Airfield was a busy place. Pilots and their planes revelled in the crisp mountain air, providing endless entertainment for those below. A tiger moth and 2 chipmunks, flying in formation, were music to the ear and a feast for the eye. The busy social hub of the event was Hoekfontein and its surrounds. The food village was always busy, as food villages usually are. But what set this one apart were the surrounding activities. There was always something to look at, some vintage machine to behold and admire. The village was set up right in the thick of the activity, with food for both body and soul. Simply sitting in the sunshine, watching the trains go by was reward enough. But the food itself put the cherry on the cake. going gets tough, the tough take on the job. Men and their machines. This is the stuff that dreams are made of. A vintage Caterpillar scraper is working in tandem with a bulldozer to shape an obstacle course to use during the Stars event. Both machines date from the 1950s. The bulldozer provides the extra push needed to help the scraper's blade dig deep into the ground, gouging great mounds of soil out of the earth. When the hopper is full, the bulldozer reverses into position, ready for the next pass. The scraper then distributes the soil to the places where it will be needed for the obstacle course. The armoured car that's about to put the new obstacle course to the test is a Rattle, one of an extensive collection of military vehicles preserved by the Sandstone Heritage Trust. Many of these vehicles were developed during South Africa's decade-long conflict in Namibia and Angola. Due to the sanctions that were imposed on South Africa at the time, a highly developed armaments industry was nurtured by the government of the day. The indomitable Rattle was just one of the fighting vehicles to come out of that program. The Casper troop carrier and the Buffel personnel carrier were others. A feature of the South African designs was a much improved defense against landmines, technology that has since been adopted even in countries like the United States. Needless to say, military vehicles are always loved by the crowds. And for the younger generation, a gargantuan tank has a distinct heavy metal appeal. A close relationship is maintained between the Sandstone Heritage Trust and the South African Armour Museum. The Armour Museum exhibits regularly at these events, adding breadth and depth to the military experience. Sandstone's Sherman tank is a perennial favourite with the crowd. For many, this World War II icon stirs up the soul as well as the dust.
Sandstone Estates has a vast collection of agricultural tractors and equipment and machinery. There are up to 300 tractors in total, and many are restored and in good running order. So we made a selection for this show of about 20 tractors to bring out onto the field, which we are alternating. We're having maybe 5, 6, up to 10 running at any given time if we can find enough drivers. It's a fair representation. We have the three major countries, the tractor manufacturing countries represented, the US of course, Great Britain, and a few from Germany. And some special ones from Britain, the Marshall NT6, which was one of only less than 200 ever built. Titan from the US, which is quite rare these days, as well as the more common Massey Fergusons, Fordsons, and stuff like that. We're from Germany, we have Lancers, and we have a lovely Hanomag, which is out at the moment doing its job, chasing trains and impressing people. not all the tractors are restored to immaculate condition. A few, a handful. The rest are running as if they're working on a farm, and they've had a hard life, and it shows. But that's what we believe in, variety and authenticity, that's the word. Now here we have a McCormick 1530, dating from late 20s, early 30s. Quite a substantially big tractor from the US of A, of course. A lovely, big, long-stroke engine. Not an uncommon tractor, steel wheels. Many have survived because they were so tough and so simple. Pretty tough to operate. The steering's pretty solid. And of course the steel wheels here throw you around all over the place, and the noise is quite horrendous, and absolutely no protection from the elements, and heat from the engine in summer was probably unwelcome as well.
Oxen were very much a part of South African life well into the 1930s, and at Sandstone Estates the tradition continues. A ride in an ox wagon was the most peaceful way to get around the estate, with just the squeaking of the wagon and the sound of the yokes, gentle on the mind and the ear. In September 2018, Sandstone's Afrikaner oxen set a world record of 36 animals in a single span, and on 2 occasions during Stars 2019, this feat was repeated. "36 oxen in a single span. This is something that is yet to be achieved anywhere else in the world. These beautiful animals have really made their mark on Stars 2019. From draft animals to the big boys of vintage road traction, there are not many machines that can compete in brute size and strength with the mighty Fowler B5. She's of the type used by the British in the Anglo-Boer War, among the earliest uses of mechanization on the battlefield. This one dates from 1901 and could be found everywhere, trundling contentedly through the lands, seemingly oblivious to the load of 40 tons trailing behind her. In comparison to the B5, the 1904 McLaren is a lithe and nimble machine. Weighing in at only about 5 tons, she has an almost indecent turn of speed for a traction engine. Gracing the skyline very appropriately is the 1907 Marshall Colonial. She is appropriate because these engines were designed specifically for export to undeveloped countries like South Africa, and as such were based more on American than on British practice. She has only a single gear ratio instead of the usual British 2 or 3, and a clutch that's built into the flywheel. One of the problems about a large roster of locomotives is giving them all enough space in which to stretch their legs. But there's a big difference between large and powerful engines like these and the tiny locomotives that once served in agriculture and industry. To accommodate these smaller classes, a special railway has been built for them, on which they can run safely without hindering operations on the main line. This has been named Seds Railway after the grandson of one of Sandstone's directors. Seds Railway is mostly used for giving train rides to children of all ages. It forms a separate loop, 2.5 kilometres long, and is built to the same 2-foot gauge as the main line. But Seds Railway isn't just for children. A little train of cocoa pans, its engine puffing mightily, is enough to warm the heart of any steam enthusiast. And as it emerges from the depths of the forest, it's not difficult to imagine that it's a real train on its way to collect a new load of stone from the quarry. Capturing the unique appeal of working steam was, for a large group of visitors, one of their biggest reasons for coming to Stars 2019. These are the photographers for whom recording history with accuracy and perfection is almost an obsession. For 10 days, the locomotives and authentic trains of Sandstone were in their sights. These specialized photographers are capturing history for the generations to come. Instilling an appreciation of heritage in the children of today is essential if it's to be passed on to the children of tomorrow. And for one little girl at least, it looks as though the message is getting through. Another star of the show was Sandstone's roomly oil-pulled tractor. It was drizzling when this giant machine was heaved into action, but rain is no challenge for an engine of 31-litre capacity. Getting the engine going, though, can be. Unbelievable as it may seem, these acrobatics were the normal method of starting the engine back in the day. The engine is oil rather than water-cooled, hence the name oil-pull. She can't travel at much more than walking pace, but is quite capable of blithely flattening anything in her path. Something no one can control is the weather, and Stars of Sandstone was not spared a display from the elements. Under these circumstances, the most sensible thing to do is simply to run for cover. But in this part of the world, the weather can change in the space of a few minutes. After a 20-minute thunderstorm, the countryside is refreshed, the dams are replenished, and the grounds are waterlogged. Muddy puddles are left in the wake of the rain, but these create renewed opportunities for work and play. This is a chance for steamrollers to strut their stuff. But while a 1940s marshal skirts the prospect of getting her feet wet, a 1935 fowler just gets stuck in and tackles the job. Smooth steel wheels and slippery mud are not a good match. But with a bit of determined grappling, the Fowler manages to inch her way out of the stickiness. Even for a perfectly restored vintage car, a muddy road is just part of the romance of the ride.
It's a 1928 Chevrolet with a 4-cylinder engine. They changed to 6-cylinder at the end of 1928. But it's a 2-seat sport coupe, so it's quite a rare model.
Peter claims that the coffee cup on the radiator was put there simply to keep the coffee hot. But further investigation revealed that he didn't want to admit to having lost the radiator cap.
Right, there we go. So he needs a 4-wheel drive. It surprised me. We didn't know we could do this. But people are telling me that in 1928 the roads were like this, so the cars were built to handle it. It seems to be quite true. Go right through the mud there without any trouble. Here we go.
Once upon a time, stationary engines were the labour-saving grace of every farm and factory. Machines were ingeniously adapted to power almost anything from milling machines to butter churns. The doyen of stationary engines at Sandstone Estates is Dani Pretorius. This 1940s Southern Cross pump was designed to replace windmills. Although many were manufactured, good working examples are hard to come by today. The fascinating simplicity of such machines can keep one mesmerized for hours. The Stirling cycle engine is a model of simplicity.
The Stirling cycle is just a sealed cylinder with a loose fitting piston, and with the heat source we heat the bottom and there's cooling water on top. So as the air expands, it moves the piston up and the cooling water cools the chamber down, it goes down again, and the whole cycle continuously repeats. It's not a very powerful engine, but the principle was around about 1815 was a patent registered.
At the other end of the scale is the 3-ton flywheel of Sandstone's enormous national engine. Legend has it that this engine could run for 100 years continuously, and that's not hard to believe. It's a single-cylinder diesel rated at 42 brake horsepower at 275 RPM. Its early origins are obscure, but the previous owners of the farm bought it in 1972 from a Roman Catholic mission in Lesotho. It was used to drive a generator for electricity on the farm. The generator was manufactured in 1935, so presumably the engine also dates from that period. These days, this magnificent machine is the star attraction in the Sandstone pub. Its reassuring exhaust beat letting the outside world know it's alive and well. Behind the scenes were the people who made everything run smoothly. With trains in constant motion, somebody needed to ensure that they didn't connect too closely with each other or with anything else. This was the shared responsibility of train controllers Peter Mole, and Dave Richardson.
Train control to 113.
Peter came all the way from Wiltshire in the UK to help keep the trains running safely.
I give them specific instructions as to where trains can go to, like that, and they report to me when they come to the destination or the reporting point, and I tell them where they can go next or keep them there until it becomes safe. And the other side is the mix of people who we bring together. Often they don't know each other. We probably have 25% of the people have been here before, but it's a mixture of South Africans, Europeans, mostly from England, and Australians. And again, we're trying to get those people to work together as a train crew and safely run the trains with one or two technical challenges along the way.
Dave Rollins has a special claim to fame. He was the official driver of the famous Flying Scotsman on its visit to Australia in 1988. Today, he lives in Australia and is a routine participant of Sandstone's events in the Eastern Free State.
Well, we're at Sandstone Estates in South Africa, near Vicksburg, between Bethlehem and Bloemfontein. It's a wonderful 2-foot gauge railway, over 20 steam locomotives, and we've been here, well, I've been here several times in the past, most events from 2008 onwards, and there's a few others who come back on a regular basis.
Dave is very familiar with the line by now and knows a thing or two about how best to negotiate a train around it.
On what we call a normally fully fitting passenger train, it's normally the train engine that takes the load and the assisting engine helps him. But what we are running, although they're passenger trains, the couplings are quite loose between the engine and the carriage and every carriage, so therefore that's got the challenge of its own. So we have worked it out that it's far better for the lead engine to take the load, and then once we've got the load, the second engine will then assist us as required. Most of the railway we only run with 4 or 5 coaches, but certainly when doing the long trip around the mountain with the Mountain Wanderer, we have to have a minimum of 8 coaches coming down the mountain, mainly because the braking efficiency of the coaches, being they're lighter than the steam locomotive, gives us the extra braking capability.
I know it's built on a farm, but it's a proper railway that's been built to a good standard, and there are some very severe uphill gradients as well as downhill, and they are very challenging, especially when you go up around the mountain towards Vailima and the school. Very sharp corners and very steep gradients, so you really need to know what you're doing to get a train around Sandstone.
The special magic possessed only by a steam train has cast its spell over generations of children. And once you've been bewitched, you're hooked for life.
My interest came from my dad, who took us out in South African Railways days in the 1970s and the 1980s. The love for the steam engines and everything grew from that. And I eventually started on the Alfred County Railway in 1990 as a fireman, and just took it from there. Went up the ranks, became a driver, got to know about Sandstone when it first started in about 1996. So it's been more than 20 years that I've known them, and I'm finding myself here at Sandstone Estates today volunteering on the lovely locomotive that we see behind us today, NG10 number 61.
I've got the first 3 out, standing here back at the house with the first 3. Okay, so we've just into a race now with Anthony. I think he's going to turn down now and with the struggling. Maybe he can just come and help you there with the ball, maybe. Then I'll get out of the corner there.
Number 61 is the latest engine to observe the long tradition of inaugurating a new locomotive at these events. She was one of a batch of 6 Baldwin 462s delivered to the Eastern Cape's Aventure Railway in 1916. Withdrawn from service in 1960, she was moved to the safe haven of the Sandstone Heritage Trust in 2006. She was rebuilt from a state of almost total dereliction and has taken her place as the newest jewel in the crown of the Sandstone Heritage Trust.
Even if you don't like steam engines particularly, I think you could still enjoy the time here because there's so much to do and just watching everything, and it's very nostalgic. I just spoke to somebody just now who grew up in England, and she actually cried when she arrived because seeing the steam engine just reminded her of her childhood. So I think the nostalgia thing is wonderful. When I was a child, I grew up in a place called Clapham, which is in London, and we had the National Rail Museum in our high street. So I grew up thinking every child had railway engines in their high street. For me it was normal. We had a replica of Stephenson's rocket right on the high street. If you went shopping or whatever, you saw this engine. I just grew up thinking it was normal. I travelled to school by train. I used to watch the Brighton Bell coming out of Clapham Junction. So my love of trains has been there from a very early age.
The past is at the core of this amazing living museum, but how will the future unfold? As the founder of the Sandstone Heritage Trust, Wilfred Mole is often asked, what does the future hold for the marvellous machines that have been so carefully restored and preserved, and indeed for the Sandstone Heritage Trust itself?
I would say that the future is very promising. The assets are as safe as assets can be. I wouldn't expect them to be safer if they were in most other countries in the world. There's depth to this place, both in terms of the quality of the heritage items and the diversity of heritage items. And I feel very comfortable with the fact that most of the people I spoke to really took that on board. It was a very good group. I feel that this year it was a more discerning audience. They knew what they were looking at. They appreciated what they were looking at more than perhaps in previous years.
To a large extent, the show was managed by the participants themselves.
Give them the challenge and let them run it. Classic example, aviation. They looked after themselves, they arranged their own flights, they were creative, and I simply sat back and enjoyed them. That was replicated with a traction engine group from Cornwall. These guys arrived, assessed the challenge, took every single road steam engine we had, gave me a list of things they needed, and then simply got on with it. There were no real modules that did not function independently and professionally. and so we throw everything we can at it. The fact we all collapse in a heap and need lots of sleep afterwards is fine.
The close of Stars of Sandstone 2019 was marked, as always, by the Grand Parade. It's become a tradition for this parade to give the final salute to history. This year, Brigadier General Fezile Mbochi had the honour of taking the salute. As the visitors begin to leave, Stars of Sandstone comes not to an end, but to a new cycle of life.